Hello everyone, my name is Andrew, today we continue learning Python, and today we'll create our own financial exchange in Python. So let's start. Of course, we're not going to finish that financial exchange today, but what we're going to do is create a skeleton for our future project. And if you have not realized it yet, I'm going to create a playlist where I'm going to write my own code, write my own program, which is going to be a financial exchange in Python. First of all, why financial exchange? Because there are tons of programs or tons of tutorials on how to write a program on YouTube, but none of them have ever written a financial exchange as far as I'm concerned. So there are lots of messengers, social networks, shops is like the most widely used project on YouTube, but financial exchange is a really hard idea to produce, and that's why I chose it as my own project. Alright, so what we're going to do today is just set up our skeleton. And in order to do that, what we need to do is pick our technologies and pick our languages. Of course, as a language, we're going to pick Python, because as I said, we're continue to learn Python. And what is the framework that we're going to use to connect our frontend and our backend? So what is the framework of our backend? How we're going to send that information? I chose FastAPI. So FastAPI is a Python framework that helps you build backend applications or any web applications in general. And I have never worked with FastAPI on my channel before, so I thought that, right, it's a great thing, let's just start with it. So once again, today we're just going to set up our whole project, and yeah, let's just start with the code. Alright, so here is our project. As you probably know, I have both Russian and English channels, so it's going to be really hard for me to maintain both Russian and English version. And if you are wondering if you can get that code, you can go to my GitHub, subscribe to it, and then go to Findev. So Findev is the name of our project, Financial Development. I think a very good name for that exchange. And here you have branches in GitHub. I think you know how those work in Git technologies. And what you can do is go to English. So master is for the Russian version. As you can see, I already have API, main.py, requirements, and all that stuff. But right now I created an English branch that will allow you to get the code that I'm writing in those videos. So with you on my English channel. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is create our settings.py file. Why is that? Because for every project, it doesn't matter how the project is going to turn out, we're going to have settings. And yeah, I'm going to add that file to GitHub. And what I want to do aside from that is actually copy git ignore. So git ignore, I always copy that git ignore from that URL. So you can just write Python git ignore, and it will help us not to put things that we don't need to our GitHub page. So I'm just going to create a new file called git ignore here, git ignore, like that. I should add it, and I just going to paste all of the stuff here. So basically, if you have never worked with GitHub before, that's all the stuff that just normal like PyCache, cache stuff, our virtual environment, things that we don't need in our Git or in our version control system. And of course, I'm going to set up IDEA, so .idea as well. .idea is a folder that is used by PyCharm. So PyCharm is my IDE, and that folder is used to store all of the settings, all of the configurations, and that stuff should not be on our GitHub or on our version control system. That's why I'm putting it in my git ignore, and it will not be reflected on our GitHub. All right, so what we need to do right now in settings is install a library that is called environs. So environs helps you to work with environment variables. If you have no idea about environment variables, why do we need to use them, what are those, then you can watch my other video on keys, passwords, and all that stuff, not only in Python, but in any programming language. All right, so what I'm going to do here is import environs, and then environs.env to create our env object that will allow us to get all of the variables from our environment. And here what I need to do is just write env.readenv from a file name called .env. A lot of envs here, but what I'm basically doing is I'm saying that you need to import environs library, then create env object, it's like the main object for that library, and read a file which is called .env. We don't have that file yet, but we'll create it a little bit later. And put all of the variables from that file to that env object. And after that, if I'm going to need a variable, for example, called password, I'm just going to use env parenthesis and password as the key, and it will give me my password. Now our passwords will be secured,
Our settings will be dynamic, so we will be able to change them without ever touching our code. And that's much better than it is with raw values that go like that. Hello. That's just bad because you show all your passwords, you show all your keys on your version control system. And I think if you watch my other video, I'm not gonna repeat everything I said in that publication. So if you watch my other video, then you'll know that that is not alright, and why is it very, very bad for your project, and you always need to use env. Alright, so for now we don't have any variables, I'm just creating it as a skeleton, but we're gonna need it today. The next thing that we're gonna need is API. So I'm gonna create a new Python package with init.py in the API folder, so it's going to be a Python package then, and that folder will contain all of the things that are related to our API. We're going to have everything, so everything that is related to our web server, to our API inside of that folder. And that is really, really important for you to listen, because I don't want to expose any dependencies on my project as a whole. So what do I mean by that? If I have a lot of dependencies, and as I said, we're going to work with FastAPI, it's going to be really problematic for me to change those. And what I want to do is actually have as least dependencies as possible. The only dependency that we're going to have, which is going to like be a general dependency, is a async library in Python. And that library is used to work with asynchronous code. FastAPI works asynchronously, so we can't really avoid that dependency. But other than that, we can remove all of the direct dependencies on other libraries. So FastAPI is one of the examples, and what I'm going to do in API folder is create a new file called api.py, and I'm only going to write something which is directly related to FastAPI in that folder API. Alright, I think you know what I'm saying. We just don't expose any dependencies outside of API folder. Of course, dependencies which are related to API. Then we're going to have database, and we're going to have like, for example, Tortoise ORM or SQL Alchemy, and we're only going to work with that specific ORM inside of the database. We're going to have services, so many layers, and as least dependencies as possible. Alright, so it's going to come to you if you don't understand it right now. But what I'm going to do in API is actually create my server, so create my web application. But what I need to do is install two libraries. The first one is called FastAPI, and the second one is called Hypercorn. So FastAPI is a library that allows us to really create our web servers, and Hypercorn is an SGI, so ASGI, not VSGI, but ASGI, web server that allows us to run our FastAPI. FastAPI or any other web-related project in Python will not work with without either ASGI server or VSGI server. For example, Django uses VSGI, but FastAPI and all the other major frameworks, well, a lot of other major frameworks use ASGI technologies. And yeah, those are kind of like web servers that allow us to serve our requests. And Hypercorn, so Hypercorn is one of those examples, so an SGI server. Okay, what we're going to do in API is import FastAPI, and we're going to import something from FastAPI. So from FastAPI, we're going to import our FastAPI, like that. And then I'm going to create my application, so app equals FastAPI, like that. And let's actually create a simple view. So if you have never worked with FastAPI before, then I'm just going to explain everything from scratch. FastAPI has views, or they call them routes, and the route is basically a URL that your users go to. I'm going to create a decorator, app.get, and that will allow me to create a GET request and go to some URL. I'm going to put / here, so it's going to be like our root or index web page, and then I'm going to create an asynchronous function called test route, for example, test route. And what I'm going to do here is just return a simple dictionary, hello, true, or something like that. It's just a test route for now, and we don't really need something important in here, so yeah, just test route, hello, which returns true. Nothing very fancy. Okay, but now if I run that project, nothing's gonna happen. Why? Because we need an SGI server to run our FastAPI application. And I'm gonna go to init.py file in my API folder, and here I'm gonna import from Hypercorn. So Hypercorn is, once again, an SGI server that allows you to serve your requests from FastAPI, so from your user to your FastAPI. And what I'm going to do is from Gippercorn Asyncio, I'm going to import a function which is called serve. So that function will allow us to run our project. What we're going to do here is call our serve, and we're going to need to provide an app. So from API.API, I'm going to import my app, the app that I created here, so that FastAPI app, and I'm just going to need to put it inside of my serve app, and then I'm going to need to put a config. I'm going to create a new config, and you need to import it from Gippercorn as well. So that config can take a lot of stuff. For example, host and port of your application, logging settings, are you running in debug or not, so debug mode and all of that stuff. So serve is just a function that requires you to provide your app and your config. In our case, config is just going to be an empty object, so we don't need anything at all, just for now, because in the future we're going to set up our own config with all of the fancy stuff inside. What I'm going to do is not just call serve right away, but I'm going to create a new asynchronous function called run API, like that. And let's put that serve function inside. And of course, serve function is, if you go here, is an asynchronous function. So we need to await it, not just call it as it is with normal functions. All right, so we await our serve function, and run API is a function. Function. Run API is a coroutine that will allow us to run our application with serve function from Gippercorn, which is an SGI server that is required to run our FastAPI application. It may sound very, very complicated, but it's going to be really, really easy once you get used to it. All right, so what we're going to do next? Next, I'm going to create a new file called main. So that file, let's add it, is going to be the main entry point of our project. As I said, we don't want to impose any dependencies on our project outside of API directory, because it's going to be really, really hard to get rid of them once we want to change our library, once we want to update our library, or once we want to change the code. That's why inside of init.py, I created a run API function that will allow us to simply code and run our API directly. Very, very simple. So the whole idea is that inside of main, let me just quickly write the code. It's a normal asyncio stuff that lots of you know. All right, so what we have here is a simple asyncio code. So we import asyncio library, and that is the only module that we're going to have a direct dependency on. So we're not going to have any direct dependencies on FastAPI, on our database, on our, on our cache system, none of that. We're only going to have one direct dependency, which is asyncio. And we're using it because it's really, really hard to get rid of asyncio, and it's really useless to get rid of asyncio, because if you're working with asynchronous programming in Python, that's the only way. So, of course, there are other ways like twisted, yes, somewhat, but asyncio is like the main library, and if you want to work with asynchronous programming, then in 99.9999999% of the cases, you're going to go with that module. All right, so we imported here in our if name equals main, we have a very basic stuff. So we get our event loop, run our function main, and run our loop forever. Inside of that API, run API, what we are doing is, or inside of that, that line is just basically importing our run API function, and then we call it inside of main. We can call it directly, but we're going to have database setup, cache setup in the future, so it's beneficial for us to just create our main function right away, and run API will be called as a separate function inside of that main. Okay, so now what we can do. Now if I run my project, you will see running on that port. If I'm gonna go here, you will see hello true. Why is that? Because as you remember, in API, we return hello true. So let me walk you through the whole idea, through the whole project that we have right now. We run all of that, so I just described it, and we go to run API. Run API is a function in init.py inside of our API module. We don't show any direct dependencies here, so that's great. And run API just simply serves our application, which is created in API.API, which is a FastAPI application, and has a config and has our default config. API.py file contains all of the things that are related to API setup. So our application, our middleware in the future, all of the things that are related to API. In our case, it contains a route right now, so test route. And that's kind of it. So that's the whole idea. If we go to that test route here. So you remember that we have an index route, so only a slash here. Even if I put slash here, it's still going to redirect me to localhost 8000. And here we have hello true. If I change it to false, it's going to change, not right away because I need to restart my project, but it's going to change after that. So hello false. Every response that you're going to send in every web framework or in every application. So every application where you have something that you need to send out, I don't know, mobile application, web application, backend application, well, web application, anything that where you have something that you need to send out to the user or to other apps, you're going to have something which represents your response. And if our responses are just represented by that dictionary, it's going to be really, really bad for us. Why is that? Imagine that we have another, I'm just going to copy it. Imagine that we have another test route, so test route 2, and we have 2 here as our URL. What if, and let's write second route so we can see the difference in the response. Second route. So we have 2 separate routes here. And what if I want to add a new field, for example, the version of my API? Other users will work with our financial exchange and they will know, all right, I'm working with that API version, I know what to do with it. What if that's the case? Well, then they're screwed. Because if I want to add, well, they are not screwed, but we are screwed as programmers. Because if I want to add a version to my response, what I'm basically need to do is go to test route 2, test route 1, and add our version manually. So version 1.0.0, like that. But that sucks, because we have 50 routes in different directories with different file names. We can't really find all of them very quickly. We have different returns, so we have ifs, for loops, while statements, all of that stuff. And we don't really want to write our version like that, because what if a version changes and I only change it in one route? So for example, alright, version 1.0.1, so we had a patch. That version in test route, so the first test route did not change because I forgot to do that, and basically I imposed a bug on my code. Instead of just returning raw versions, what we need to do is actually create our own response. So all of those dictionaries, all of the data that we return from the routes in FastAPI are going to go to a response system. And by default, we have JSON response. So JSON response is like a default response for FastAPI. All right, so we need to do something about that. We have different responses and somehow we need to connect them with one simple class that will allow us to add any information whenever we want to. And that class should be like a single entry point for every response that we will ever send out to our user. And FastAPI allows us to really easily set up that class. And if I'm going to go to that FastAPI parentheses and I'm going to press Ctrl P in PyCharm, and you're going to see, you're going to see that there are tons of things that we can provide in that FastAPI object. And we're going to provide a lot of those, but not now, in the future. The only thing that we need to provide right now is default response class. So default response class is a class that allows you to somehow change your responses. Imagine that you want to add version. You are going to add version with that simple class. And in order to create that class, I'm going to introduce a new file called responses. Of course, I'm going to add it to Git. And here I'm going to import from FastAPI responses. I'm going to import our default response, which is called JSON response. So right now we're using that class in order to serve our users. However, what I'm going to do is create a new class called custom JSON response, and I'm going to have JSON response as a parent of that custom JSON response class. Then I'm going to go to, I pressed Ctrl and left click of my mouse if you're interested, and I went to JSON response. So that is the class itself inside of the library. And here we have one function which is called render. As you can see, the only thing that it does is dumps our content into JSON, representation of that content. And what we need to do is two things. The first one is we need to call render like that. Of course, import typing, so it's going to be easier for us to work with all that stuff. Typing should be split with FastAPI. And the next thing that we're going to need to do in here is call our render. So call super from our render. I'm going to provide content as the content of my response, and then let's just return it. So that is basically the class that we have by default. So the only thing that we do right now is return our content from our the content from our user. Very, very simple. Inside of that render, we just JSON dump it into a string and return it to our frontend. However, if you want to add a new field, for example, what you can do is say content from version equals your version, for example, 1.0.0. And now, if I'm going to go to api.py and introduce my custom JSON response as the default response class for my FastAPI object, and I'm going to rerun my project, and right now you can see that we only have hello false, but if I refresh my page, version 1.0.0. If I go to the second route, so you can see second route, false, but version is still 1.0.0, and I have never added anything inside of my test routes. So that is very, very powerful. Once again, we provide default response class as the object in our FastAPI application, and in responses we just basically change render function. What will be better is that if we check if our content is dictionary, because in that case, content version, let's do it like that. In that case, if we have like a list or something like that, we are not going to be able to, that function, if we have a list and we're going to write content from string version, that's going to give us an error. So I want to remove that error and just work with content version if we only provide dictionary as our initial information that we're going to send to the user. So the only thing that is left to be removed is our version, because I want to change it to settings.api version. It's going to be much easier for us to work with that type of stuff, because now we don't write like a random string here. We use it as a setting in our, as a global setting in our project. I'm going to go to settings.py, so the file that we wrote as the first one, and here I'm going to create API version, which equals to environ from API version. And now the only thing that we need to do is create our own .env file, so the file that is being read here, so as you can see .env here, and we just need to write our API version. So I'm just going to have my API version here, and we're going to use it directly from our environ and from our settings. That's much better, and I think for now that's everything that we have for our project. So thank you for watching. My name is Andrew. Subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment, and bye bye.